the sugaring season with a lesson in taste. For nearly a decade now, UVM Extension has been educating experts and novices alike on how to develop a taste for off flavors and maple. And now they're refining their taste buds even more to better understand the sweet stuff. Good afternoon and welcome to Across the Fence. I'm Joleil Whitney. There's a good chance that you've never tasted bad or off-flavored maple syrup. That's because there are regulations and standards in place to make sure that that never happens. Not to mention the sugars and maple producers who strive to make maple cookies and candies, syrup and sugar, the best it can possibly be. As sugar makers continue to refine their palates, they're unlocking more of the mysteries of how and why maple tastes so good. Joining me today is Mark Isselhardt, the UVM Extension Maple Specialist. Welcome back Across the Fence.
Thanks for having me.
Before we jump into tasting, which is obviously the main focus of today, can you tell me how the season's going so far? Right now it's late March.
Sure, yeah. So we had a lot of early warm weather this year. We had people tapping earlier than ever at their operations. Some people tapping at average times, sort of dependent on how big your operation was. Overall, right now, folks are about 75% of where they'd expect to be for a full crop. There's obviously a range. Some people in the warmer areas are just about done and are pleased. Other people are still working, but it looks like it's going to shape up to be a decent crop for sure.
So are we looking at breaking any records, or is it just going to be a good year so far?
Too soon to tell. This next week or two will really decide whether or not the sap cooperates and people have a great year.
And earlier on Across the Fence, like a couple weeks ago, we spoke with Roy DeRocher about taste and how to develop that kind of taste in different like products and components. How does that apply to maple?
Right. So maple, grade A maple syrup is graded on 4 standards: color, clarity, density, and flavor. Some of them are quantitative. We can use an instrument to measure density. Clarity is a visual assessment. Color, we can also use a tool. Flavor is pretty subjective. And as Roy mentioned, there are some rigorous ways to test flavor. In maple, we have sort of accumulated knowledge and general terms to describe the different grades. And that's really what we work with. The regulations talk about the color and how strong the flavor should be. And then as part of the Extension Maple program, we educate producers on how to identify good flavors, and if there are defects, what are the causes of those defects.
And we were speaking about this a little bit earlier, but grades have changed a lot recently. Can you quickly walk us through what the different maple grades are?
There have been several iterations of grading standards dating back 100 years. The most current standards are just over 10 years old, and they have combined all the pure syrup grades into one grade A. There's no limit on colors. You can have very dark syrup, you can have very light syrup. That's a reflection of consumer demand largely. And as long as it doesn't have a defect, you can have extremely dark, very strong flavored syrup, which consumers appear to be desiring. Just as a lot of people like light syrup with a delicate flavor, there's many people who really like the robust flavor.
And it's been about a decade since UVM Extension developed flavor kits to taste maple. How well can a sugar maple out in the field taste and detect off flavors in their own?
A lot of it depends on experience, and one of the things about being a maple producer is you're really tied to your operation. It's difficult to get out and visit other operations when they're operating. It can be challenging to taste a wide range of syrups because you make your own, you're probably not going to buy others. And so some of the training we do, including the off-flavor kits, is to give sugar makers experiences where, hey, this is a generally accepted defect. This is not necessarily late season, it's actually a syrup that has a known defect, and this is how to identify it. And then everyone in your operation should taste and understand what that flavor is. Sometimes the person running the evaporator might be so saturated in the steam, they may not pick up on that little defect coming in. The beauty about maple is it's a one ingredient. It's maple sap, it's a natural product. We don't process it, we don't remove things that are there naturally. We just have to identify when the quality has left grade A standards.
Sure, and speaking of detecting off flavors, we actually have 4 here that we're going to try. Can you walk me through this
Sure,
process?
well, we're going to work left to right. So why don't you just start by tasting the first one on your left. You always want to look to see the color.
Okay.
And darker syrup will have a stronger flavor.
All right.
You want to smell, and then put a little in your mouth and have a taste.
Okay.
So that's a nice dark amber syrup.
Pretty good.
It has a lot of flavor. Mm-hmm. So why don't we go to the next one?
All right.
It's a little bit darker, but it's in the same grade color-wise.
Oh, you're right. I skipped some steps, but Oh yeah.
So
It's
pretty
got
different
something
flavor.
else in there,
Right,
yeah.
right. So that's what we call sour or sour sap.
Okay.
Maple sap is the only ingredient in maple syrup. That one, the sap had been digested partially by microorganisms, breaking apart some of the sugars and making this sort of sour, tart flavor. It does not meet the flavor profile for grade A. So we see this sometimes later in the season. Sap flow rates go down. It takes longer to get enough sap to boil to make a batch of syrup. And then warm weather can promote growth in that sap before it's boiled. It's perfectly safe. It just imparts a flavor that is not grade A.
All right. Okay. That makes sense.
Let's go to the next one.
Okay.
So same thing. You want to look, and what you might notice is it's a darker color.
Yeah.
So you would already expect a stronger flavor.
Okay.
So that different doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just means it's different.
Sure.
So look, you want to smell.
Okay.
So there's a lot going on there. It's a strong flavor, stronger than the earlier one, but not necessarily off flavored. It just has a lot of flavor to it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then there's the last one has similar color. You want to make sure you smell. And smelling, those aromatics are what's going to be sometimes the first clue that something isn't quite right. So I don't know if you picked up on any smell
I
there.
did a little bit, but I can't identify it. It's just not quite.
Sure. Yep.
I didn't like that one. Yeah.
So that one is called Buddy. That is probably the most common off-flavor defect that we see. It's tied to the tree exiting dormancy late in the sugaring season. We can't look and see a particular stage of bud development. It's not tied to anything visual. The chemistry of the sap has changed. When you concentrate it during the boiling process, sometimes people get a chocolatey note or a Tootsie Roll kind of note, and it can be bitter on an extreme level. Again, does not represent just late season, very dark syrup. That's actually a flavor defect that doesn't belong in a grade A retail container.
Okay, and is this something that any consumer out there, anyone watching at home, would be able to identify and taste in their own maple syrup?
Chances are that if you're not familiar with the range of flavors that are naturally occurring, it might be a little hard to pick up. Maybe it's someone who doesn't really know about maple who tastes it and says something is not quite right there. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can also reach out to the Agency of Agriculture. They do retail testing in the marketplace. So if there's concerns about whether or not the quality of the syrup meets the standard, you can reach out to them. And really it's about making the best quality product and having that be what reaches the consumer.
And we talked about this a little bit before because I was curious about how texture plays a role. Is like mouthfeel a big component in grading maple?
Sure. I mean, for the most part, mouthfeel relates to the density of syrup, the concentration of sugar. In Vermont, we have a range of basically 67% sugar to about 69% sugar. And that has a particular viscosity and feel in the mouth. If the syrup hasn't been boiled enough, it'll be quite thin. That would be something that people would notice. Or if it's been boiled too much and the density is really high, that would also be something that could be off. If you don't filter your syrup properly or there's some damage to your filter, you can get a gritty texture. So that would be another mouthfeel type situation. Hopefully if the filtering isn't right, you'd catch it during grading for clarity.
And you taste so much syrup for your job. How did you develop your taste?
Yeah, a lot of it is over time and just having experiences tasting a lot of different operations syrup, helping judging maple contests like at the Maple Festival or other county fairs. You really get to taste a wide range, and most syrup tastes great. The off flavors are pretty rare. The issue is when they do show up, it's really helpful to know whether or not your mistake was something that the processor or producer did, or was it something we call Mother Nature related, where the physiology of the tree, something about the chemistry of the sap has changed to impart that flavor. Obviously, if it's a mistake the producer did, they can remedy that mistake. If it's a Mother Nature off flavor, it's something you just have to identify and make sure it doesn't go into a consumer package.
So it sounds like some of these off flavors are on almost a batch to batch basis. Are sugar makers always tasting every batch?
Yes. Yeah. Sugar makers' best practice would have grading each batch for all 4 attributes, so color, clarity, density, and flavor. when you're in the sugar house and there's a lot of steam, there's a lot of action going on, it can be hard to be really critical to a fine degree about flavor. So we recommend producers keep a subsample, small jar, and then maybe taste for flavor when everything has died down a little bit later after the season. You always want to taste every batch to make sure there are no big issues that have crept in, but for the most part, every producer needs to taste every batch of syrup.
And obviously off flavors aren't hitting the shelf, but how common are they within the sugar house?
It really depends on the year. Periods of prolonged warm, or not even warm, but hot temperature can impart some of those Mother Nature off flavors. Then you can have issues like syrup that just doesn't want to filter, or the classic is burning your pans. You know, running out of sap, a valve being closed when it should have been open, that sort of mistake. It really happens quite a bit for individuals, but usually once you've had that mistake once, you don't make it again. And so issues like scorch or some of those other processing mistakes, generally they're not that common once a producer has been unlucky enough to have it happen to them.
Sure, once they get their sea legs, it's a little
Exactly,
easier. Yep. And what do you think of adding different products or infusing products, sometimes even alcohol, into maple syrup? Do you think that dampens the purity of it, in your opinion?
Well, it wouldn't. All the infused flavors or the combinations with alcohol, those don't no longer meet grade A standards, but they can be a valuable product, and certainly businesses have explored branching out beyond just grade A maple syrup. So as long as consumers understand what they're purchasing, that if it has some flavor other than what's naturally there, they have to realize, okay, this is a different type of product. As long as the labeling is appropriate and people understand it, that's fine. The regulations haven't really kept up with the new surge in infused syrups. My guess is that we'll probably see a revisiting of those grading standards.
But they're valuable in their own right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And that wraps up our program for today. From the crew behind the scenes here at WCAX, I'm Joleil Whitney. Thank you for watching and have a good one.